In the previous video, we came up with 4 theories based on the accounts given by the 3 witnesses. In this video, we are going to amend, revise, or even discard these theories in light of new discoveries I made. On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, we hypothesized that Cain was already dead at the time when Lamech addressed his wives Adah and Zillah. We declared 70 times 7 to be the true translation of Lamech's poem as opposed to 77-fold. We accused the Masoretes of attempting to distort the text with the intent to disconnect Moses from potentially pointing to Christ. We discovered that the poem of Lamech is providentially summarized within the King James Isaiah 53. All 3 being dissimilar accounts and translations within the Masoretic, Septuagint, and Sefer HaYashar texts. After publishing the previous video, I was not satisfied with it, unable to declare the reason for my creeping discontent. I decided that I would publish the video anyway and deepen my research, knowing that if I find new evidence, I would gladly change my conclusions based on the findings. I restarted from the point where I always do, from the beginning, except this time I started not with the books in question but with the various descriptions of their historicity. I brushed up on the histories by rereading the introduction to Sefer HaYashar. Here follows the first relevant information. We read an excerpt from the preface of Sefer HaYashar explaining how it came to be in Spain.
It has at this time been ascertained by us that when the holy city Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus, all the military heads went in to rob and plunder, and that amongst the officers of Titus was one whose name was Sidras, who went in to search and found in Jerusalem a house of great extent, and took away all the spoils which he found there. When he wished to go out of the house, he looked at the wall and fancied that he saw treasures there. So he broke down the wall and the building and found a cask full of various books of the law, the prophets, and the hagiographer. Also books of the kings of Israel and of the kings of other nations, as well as many other books of Israel, together with the books of the Misnar adopted and established. Many rolls were also lying there. He also found there all sorts of provision and wine in abundance, and discovered an old man sitting there who was reading in those books. When the officer saw this great sight, he was greatly astonished, and said to the old man, "Why dost thou sit alone in this place, without any person remaining with thee?" So the old man answered, "For many years past was I aware of this second destruction of Jerusalem. So I built this house and made for myself a balcony, and I brought with me these books to read, and I brought also sufficient provision, thinking thereby to save my life." And God caused the old man to find favor in the eyes of the officer, who brought him forth with respect with all his books, and they went from city to city, and from country to country, until they reached Sevilla. And the officer found that this old man was possessed of wisdom and understanding, and acquainted with various kinds of science, upon discovering which he raised and honored him, was constantly in his house, and was taught by him all sorts of wisdom. And they built for themselves a lofty and capacious house in the suburbs of Sevilla, and placed there all those books. This house is yet in Sevilla unto this day, and they wrote there all the events that would hereafter take place amongst the kings of the world unto the coming of our Messiah.
Here is a second explanation reasoning for its being in Italy.
It is also found written in the book of the Hasmoneans, which has come down to us, that in the days of Ptolemy king of Egypt, he ordered his servants to go and gather all the books of laws and all the books of chronicles which they could find in the world, so that he might become wise through them, and by examining them become acquainted with the subjects and events of the world, and to compile from them a book in all matters of jurisdiction regarding the affairs of life, thereby to exercise pure justice. So they went and collected for him 965 books, and brought to him, when he commanded them to go again and seek to complete the number of 1,000 books, and they did so. After this, some of the persecutors of Israel stood up before him and said, "O king, why wilt thou trouble thyself in this manner? Send to the Jews in Jerusalem, that they shall bring unto thee the book of their law which was written for them from the mouth of the Lord by their prophets, from which thou mayest become wise, and regulate all judgments and laws according to thy desire." So the king hearkened to their words, and sent to the Jews upon this matter, who sent to him this book, for they could not give unto him the book of the Lord, for they said, We cannot give the law of the Lord to a stranger. Now when this book came to the hands of Ptolemy, he read it, and it pleased him greatly, and he searched therein in his wisdom, and he examined it, and found therein what he had desired, and he neglected all the other books which they had collected for him. And he blessed him who had advised him to this thing. After some time the persecutors of Israel became aware of this, that the Israelites had not sent the book of the law to the king, and they came and said unto him, O king, the Israelites have treated thee with contempt, for they did not send to thee the book of the law which we had mentioned to thee. But they sent to thee another book which they had in their hands. Therefore send to them, that they may forward unto thee the book of their law. For from that book thou wilt obtain thy desire much more than from the book which they have sent to thee. So when the king heard their words, he became exceedingly wroth against the Israelites, and his anger burned within him until he sent again to them for them to forward to him the book of the law. Fearing that they might still continue to scorn him, he acted prudently with them and sent to 70 of their elders and placed them in 70 houses, that each should write the book of the law, so that no alteration might be found in them, and the divine spirit rested upon them. And they wrote for him 70 books, and they were all of one version, without addition or diminution. At this, the king rejoiced greatly, and he honored the elders, together with all the Jews, and he sent offerings and gifts to Jerusalem, as it is written there. At his death, the Israelites acted cunningly with his son, and took from his treasures the book of the law, but left this book there, and took it not away, in order that every future king might know the wonders of the Lord, blessed be his name, and that he had chosen Israel from all nations. And that there is no God beside him. This book is therefore in Egypt unto this day, and from that time it became circulated throughout the earth, until it reached us in our captivity this day in the city of Naphtali, which is under the rule of the king of Spain.
Now you have some insight to this text history. These are the only two relevant excerpts from the preface of Sefer HaYashar I found worth repeating for you. I recommend everyone get a copy and read the entire preface so that more people can attempt to verifying the sources. Judged only by the explanations given for how the text survived and reached print, the accounts are heavily discrepant and mutually incompatible. They present two or more entirely separate and contradictory traditions about the same 1613 book. In spite of this, the contents and origin stories fascinate me. After completing my rereading of the preface, the translator's preface and the Hebrew preface, it did not give me peace. My earlier restlessness remained. I then reread the shortest and most concise introduction of them all, the preface and introduction to the Brenton Septuagint. Here follows two excerpts.
A writer, who calls himself Aristeas, says that when Ptolemy Philadelphus was engaged in the formation of the Alexandrian library, he was advised by Demetrius Valerius to procure a translation of the sacred books of the Jews. The king, accordingly, as a preliminary, purchased the freedom of more than 100,000 Jewish captives, and he then sent a deputation, of which Aristeas himself was one, to Eleazar the high priest to request a copy of the Jewish law and 72 interpreters, 6 out of each tribe. To this, the priest is represented to have agreed, and after the arrival of the translators and their magnificent reception by the king, they are said to have been conducted to an island by Demetrius, who wrote down the renderings on which they agreed by mutual conference. And thus the work is stated to have been completed in 72 days. The translators are then said to have received from the king most abundant rewards, and the Jews are stated to have asked permission to take copies of the version. Other additions were subsequently made to this story. Some said that each translator was shut into a separate cell, and that all by divine inspiration made their versions word for word alike. Others said that there were 2 in each cell, accompanied by an amanuensis. But at all events, miracle and direct inspiration were supposed to be connected with the translation. Hence, we cannot wonder that the authority attached to this version in the minds of those who believed these stories was almost unbounded. The basis of truth which appears to be under this story seems to be that it was an Egyptian king who caused the translation to be made, and that it was from the royal library at Alexandria that the Hellenistic Jews received the copies which they used.
Skipping ahead a few paragraphs.
The writer of this prologue had come into Egypt from the Holy Land. He had undertaken the translation of his grandfather's work into Greek, but in explanation of the difficulty which he had to encounter in this work, he refers to the defects found even in the version of the Law, the Prophets, and the other books of which he had previously spoken. Doubtless coming into Egypt, he was more conscious of the defects of the Septuagint version than could have been the case with Egyptian Jews, who had used the translation commonly and habitually for a century and a quarter. At Alexandria, the Hellenistic Jews used the version and gradually attached to it the greatest possible authority. From Alexandria, it spread amongst the Jews of the dispersion, so that at the time of our Lord's birth, it was the common form in which the Old Testament scriptures had become diffused. In examining the Pentateuch of the Septuagint in connection with the Hebrew text, and with the copies preserved by the Samaritans in their crooked letters, it is remarkable that in very many passages, the readings of the Septuagint accord with the Samaritan copies where they differ from the Jewish.
And right here, I found the clue that might scratch the insidious itch in the back of my mind. A fourth witness has been discovered to add testimony and hopefully bring peace to my uneasy spirit. The Samaritan Pentateuch. I did not even notice it when I showed it in the Wikipedia slide referencing the Masoretic text. Many years ago, I perused the Samaritan Pentateuch very heedlessly and put it out of my mind without a second thought. My studies at the time were more involved with eschatology. The Samaritan Pentateuch was easily forgotten. Now suddenly it seemed an essential ingredient in my pursuit of assessing the truthfulness of my previous claims. To my shame, I skipped the pages of introductory text and references, immediately paged to Genesis chapter 4, verse 17 to 24, and what I discovered was astounding.
And Ken knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Arad, and Arad begot Mael, and Mael begot Metashale, and Metashale begot Lamech. And Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Salah, and Ada bore Yabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have cattle, and his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. And Salah, she also bore Tubal-Ken, the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Ken was Nema. And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Salah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. I have killed a man for my wound and a young man for my bruising. If Ken is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold.
Now we are to draw new conclusions taking into consideration the testimony of the additional witness, on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. We hypothesized that Cain was already dead at the time of Lamech, addressing Adar and Zillah. The poem from the Masoretic text asserts that, if Cain shall be avenged, leaving the mortality of Cain as an open question, the Samaritan Pentateuch translated literally, for 7-fold is Cain avenged. This is a declarative absolute statement, meaning either Cain is dead or God's decree on Cain shall stand as a matter of divine principle. If Cain is dead, then the Masoretic text is a bit misleading. If Cain is alive, then Lamech of the Samaritan Pentateuch is portrayed as someone who esteems and believes in the integrity of God's declared vows. This idea also contradicts the frame wherein Lamech is painted in the Masoretic translation. The Septuagint leads you to believe that Cain is dead before Lamech addresses his wives in the very clear past tense, because vengeance has been exacted on Cain. The Sefer HaYashar claims that Cain and Tubal-Cain's deaths are the reason for having this discussion in the first place. There is no doubting Cain's fate in Yashar. The order of possibility appears to be thus: Cain is still alive. Cain might be alive, but he might have died recently. Cain is dead. Here is the account of Cain's death. I am still inclined that chapter 2 of the book of Yashar is a valid history given the progressive lean towards its narrative in this question. On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, We declared 70 times 7 to be the true translation of Lamech's poem as opposed to 77-fold. I dismissed the 77-fold of the Masoretic text as an intentional corruption and formulated a grand conspiracy theory around that conclusion. My findings are refuted, and the previous accusation against the Masoretes of the year 700 to 900 AD is hereby formally withdrawn. In as far as it pertains to the 77-fold, they interpreted the 77-fold correctly as doubly testified by the Samaritan Pentateuch. I still have many questions unanswered around these numbers and how or why Jesus would quote it in a false manner across translations. There might be a way to explain this when analyzing the difference between the language of math and the problems of translating Hebrew numeral thinking into Greek mathematic thinking. It has to be considered that Hebrew is a carved, hammer and chisel language, so all words and letters are from right to left as opposed to a quill and ink written language, like Greek from left to right. Could this also cause the confusion around number ordering? It remains an open question for now. On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, we accused the Masoretes of attempting to distort the text with the intent to disconnect Moses from potentially pointing to Christ. I thought about this, and it is probably not true. I think that they could not possibly have realized this connection because it is too esoteric and layered. It requires a Christ-centric perspective to discover this level of revelation. On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, we discovered that the poem of Lamech is providentially summarized within Isaiah 53, all 3 being dissimilar accounts and translations of Lamech's poem in the Masoretic, Septuagint, and Sefer HaYashar texts. Let us look again at Lamech in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Literal word-for-word translation.
And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Sala, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. I have killed a man for my wound and a young man for my bruise. If Ken is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold.
Isaiah 53, verse 4-5. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed.
Let's opine on the value of this discovery and conceptualize its profundity. I do this by way of a parable. Let's imagine that you are a baker in a town and you have 3 competitors, 4 bakers total, all working hard to satisfy the local market's demand for bread. Your margins are tight and the competition is palpable. One day, the miller does not deliver the full amount of flour you ordered, and you promptly request that your invoice be modified to the weight of the order you actually received. He obstinately denies that your delivery was short and demands you pay him the invoice, and he asserts that you incurred a fee for delaying the payment. This situation did not resolve, and escalated to the point where it became necessary that you go and find settlement in court. After both parties explain their grievances, the judge announces that 3 witnesses had been summoned to come and testify against you. They accuse you of malfeasance. You were very surprised to see the other bakers, your competitors, come in and take the stand. The 3 bakers were eager and ready to testify against you. A spectator could predict that the trial might not be fair, and it would be reasonable to assume that you and your bakery business are victims to a conspiracy. I define a conspiracy as such. Conspiracies occur when multiple parties stand to mutually benefit from an outcome, and they shape agendas and narratives, systemically guiding the odds into their favor, and when their target is vulnerable, they strike. A conspiracy is when unlikely events are orchestrated towards someone's demise. A coincidence is when something unlikely happens organically or by accident. A coincidence is when 3 random people walk into a bar and realize they are all wearing the same sweater. They laugh at the coincidence. But when they see the barman wearing exactly the same sweater, they start to think that God or the universe is trying to tell them something. Divine providence manifesting as absolute truth is something completely different from conspiracy or coincidence. Imagine 4 enemies who avoid each other at all costs, make no association purposefully, and don't even want to acknowledge each other's basic dignity. You independently ask each of them a contentious question, and they all point you in the same direction. We transcend coincidence. This is becoming the territory of absolute undeniable truth, otherwise known as the realm of divine providence. Think deeply on this chart. Here we move from wonderful coincidence to power law symmetry. This is no accident, and I would challenge all critics of Christianity and those who deny the existence of God to do a little bit of math. The chance that multiple translations outside of the prophetic text end up resonating at this scale is impossible. This is strong evidence that God has his hands in the story of human existence. It is so powerful that human attempts at preservation of texts are made to look silly in comparison to divine chance manifesting all the different words in our native English language from multiple sources in the version of the Bible we believe is the corrupted and maliciously uninspired Masoretic text. Translations over time is always a force of entropy. This defies reason. Monkeys hitting typewriters cannot produce Shakespeare, so if a conspiracy exists to project and mimic what we believe to be the invisible hand of God, then the onus is on the skeptic to prove the fraudulent trick attached to this discovery in the various Lamech stories. Sentiments were sour between the Jews and the Israelites ever since the Rehoboam tax revolt. Their kingdom split, and their interests and cultural affinities diverged. After the Assyrian War and the subsequent exile of the northern kingdom of Israel, they were known as the bastardized Samaritans. These Samaritans were despised by the Jews ever since and even up until the time of Jesus. Their northern kingdom's Pentateuch remained primitive, uncultured, and corrupted by political agendas. The Jews, on the other hand, translated their Torah histories to Greek in the 3 centuries post-Christ, and it became a dominant assortment of texts much later compiled into the Septuagint as we know it today. Sefer HaYashar was long discarded, a forgotten and disputed fairy tale. Few would commit themselves to an ancient chronicle full of epic stories. The much younger Masoretic translation, a desperate attempt to preserve tradition by denunciation of the Messiah, these 4 witnesses are not allies, they are not teammates, they are competitors. They are parallel claims on what is true and real, fallible human claims at best, yet they all testify together through the poem of Lamech and Isaiah 53. To me, this is a miracle. Atheists and those who deny that Christ has come in the flesh have to do some hard math homework. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more of this content.